The Mortal Immortal. Victoria Ashford pressed her fingers against the bathroom mirror, studying the fine lines that had appeared around her eyes seemingly overnight. At 50, she looked like any other middle-aged woman preparing for her morning commute, except for the fact that she'd been 50 for the past 3 decades. The AB negative blood coursing through her veins carried something extraordinary, a protein her kind had dubbed Vitae Perpetua. Unlike the frozen-in-time vampires of legend, Elena aged, just impossibly slowly. 1 year for every 10 that passed in the mortal world. It was both blessing and curse, allowing her to live openly among humans while forcing her to reinvent herself every few decades. She could hear Mrs. Chen next door watering her garden 3 houses down, the gentle splash of water against leaves as clear as if it were happening in the same room. The scent of fresh coffee from the cafe 6 blocks away made her mouth water. Her enhanced senses had grown sharper over the decades, a compensation perhaps for her body's gradual aging. Victoria's phone buzzed, a text from her research partner at the biotech firm where she worked as a geneticist. Another life, another identity, built carefully over the years. Dr. Rachel Chen didn't know that Victoria had been studying blood proteins since before Rachel was born, or that the breakthrough they were working on might finally explain Victoria's own condition. Morning revelation about the protein synthesis, Rachel's message read. The AB negative samples show cellular regeneration rates we've never seen. Can you come in early? Victoria smiled, her reflection showing teeth that remained perfectly white and sharp. If only Rachel knew she was texting the very subject of their research. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent decades hiding what she was, blending into human society by changing cities, careers, even her name when the aging became too slow to explain. Victoria Ashford was her 7th identity. Before that, she'd been Dr. Margaret Winters, the marine biologist. Before that, Catherine Shaw, the art historian. Each life lasted roughly 15 to 20 years before people began to notice that time touched her differently. She grabbed her lab coat and car keys, pausing at the framed photo on her nightstand. Her daughter, or rather, the daughter of her 3rd identity, smiled back at her. Diana was in her 70s now, living in a nursing home in Portland, unaware that the woman who occasionally visited as a family friend was actually her eternally aging mother. The drive to the lab was accompanied by the usual symphony of her enhanced senses. She could distinguish between the perfumes of passing joggers, hear fragments of phone conversations through closed car windows, feel the subtle vibrations of the city waking up through the steering wheel. It had taken decades to learn to filter the sensory overload, to function normally despite experiencing the world in high definition. At the lab, Rachel was already hunched over microscope slides, her excitement palpable. Victoria could smell the adrenaline in her colleagues' sweat, another ability that made human emotions as readable as books. "Look at this," Rachel said, not lifting her eyes from the microscope. "The protein in these AB negative samples. It's like it's rewriting the cellular aging process. If we could synthesize this, we could theoretically extend human lifespan indefinitely," Victoria finished, knowing exactly what Rachel was seeing because she'd been studying her own blood for decades. Exactly. But here's the strange part. The protein seems to slow aging rather than stop it entirely. It's like controlled mortality. Victoria nodded, remembering the night 60 years ago when everything changed. She'd been a young nurse in 1965, working the night shift at St. Mary's Hospital when the creature found her. Not the dramatic, romantic transformation of movies, but a desperate feeding that left her dying in an alley. Somehow, her AB negative blood had reacted differently to the vampire's bite. Instead of death or traditional vampirism, she'd been reborn as something new. Aging, but slowly. Mortal, but barely. "We need to be careful with this research," Victoria said carefully. "This kind of discovery, it could change everything." Rachel finally looked up, her eyes bright with possibility. "Change everything? Victoria, we could be looking at the end of aging as we know it. We could also be opening a door we're not prepared to walk through," Victoria interrupted gently. She'd lived long enough to know that some knowledge came with a price. As Rachel returned to her samples, Victoria pulled out her own blood work from the previous week. The protein levels were shifting again, as they did every few years. She learned to track the patterns, periods of faster aging followed by decades of near stasis. Her body seemed to be following some internal clock she didn't fully understand. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she recognized but hadn't seen in 20 years. "Is this Elena Martinez?" The voice was aged but familiar. "Speaking. This is Detective Morrison, retired now. I worked a case in Chicago in 2005, a series of unusual deaths. You were a person of interest then, Doctor. Margaret Winters." Elena's enhanced hearing picked up the slight tremor in his voice, the elevated heart rate. He was nervous but determined. "I'm sorry, you must have me confused with someone else. Funny thing about getting old, Doctor. Winters, or Martinez, or whatever you're calling yourself now. You start putting pieces together. Those deaths in Chicago, they stopped right after you disappeared. Similar deaths in Seattle in the 90s, when a Catherine Shaw vanished. Portland in the 80s. Elena closed her eyes. This was the nightmare scenario she'd always feared. Someone connecting the dots across her various identities. "What do you want, Detective?" "Just answers. I'm 83 years old. I've got maybe 5 years left, and I can't die wondering if I let a killer slip away." The truth was more complicated than Morrison could imagine. Yes, she'd fed during those early decades, when hunger and instinct still overpowered her human conscience. She'd learned control eventually, finding ways to sustain herself without killing. Blood banks, hospitals, even willing donors, who never knew the full truth. But those early years. "Meet me at Riverside Park at sunset," she said finally. "Come alone." As evening approached, Elena found herself standing by the river, watching Detective Morrison shuffle toward her across the grass. He was old, frail, but his eyes were still sharp with determination. "You haven't aged a day," he said when he reached her. 30 years and you look exactly the same." "Not exactly," Elena replied, "but close enough." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. "So what are you?" Morrison asked. "Some kind of vampire?" Elena laughed, surprising them both. "Something like that, though not quite what you'd expect." She told him everything. The slow aging, the enhanced senses, the decades of running and hiding. The early kills when hunger controlled her, and the later years when she learned to exist without murder. "The research I'm doing now," she concluded, "it might help others like me, or prevent others from becoming like me." Morrison was quiet for a long time. Finally he said, "Those families in Chicago, they deserve to know what happened to their loved ones." "They do," Elena agreed, "but they also deserve to live their lives without nightmares about monsters." "And what about you? What kind of life is this? Running, hiding, watching everyone you care about age and die while you remain." Elena looked out at the water, feeling the weight of 60 years of solitude. "It's the life I have, the only one I know how to live." Morrison pulled out a small notebook and dropped it in a trash can. "My notes," he said. 60 years of investigation. I guess some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved." As he walked away, Elena realized she was crying. Something she hadn't done in decades. The detective had given her something she'd never expected. Forgiveness from a world that didn't even know what it was forgiving. Back at the lab the next morning, Sarah was more excited than ever. "Elena, I've been thinking about our research all night. What if this protein doesn't just extend life? What if it's the key to conscious aging, choosing how fast or slow we age based on our circumstances?" Elena smiled, thinking of all the lives she'd lived, all the people she'd loved and lost. Perhaps it was time to stop running from what she was and start using it to help others. "Sarah," she said, "I think you might be onto something revolutionary." As she began outlining their next phase of research, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: hope. Not for a cure or an escape from her condition, but for the possibility that her long, strange life might finally serve a greater purpose. Outside the lab windows, the city hummed with 8 million heartbeats. Elena could hear them all, could sense the hope and fear and love that drove each one. For the first time in 60 years, she felt like she belonged to that symphony instead of simply observing it from the outside. She was still a vampire, still other, still different. But maybe, just maybe, she was finally ready to stop running from what that meant.